Welcome back to the DrupalEasy podcast, and welcome to Season 16, Episode number 2. The theme of Season 16 is making Drupal development easier, and in today's episode, we'll be talking with Luca Lusso about his new book, Modernizing Drupal 10 Theme Development. Before we get to my interview with Luca, please allow me to mention that the next semester of DrupalEasy's professional module development course begins on January 30th. Now, this course is 15 weeks long. We meet for 2 half-days a week, and we cover topics such as setting up your code editor, using Xdebug, writing automated tests, and so much more. Check it out at DrupalEasy.com/PMD. Hi, Luca. Welcome to the DrupalEasy podcast.
Hi, Mike. Thank you for inviting me.
Sure. So, Luca Lusso. Yeah, it's fun to say. I feel like I'm pronouncing it a little bit wrong somewhere. But what's your Drupal background? How did you get into Drupal? How long have you been in the community? And what's your Drupal story?
Okay. Yes, I started using Drupal in 2007, probably. So a long time ago. We are working on a project with a friend of mine about a course in a university, and we are looking for a CMS to automate and to let editors write things. We try some alternatives, and then we choose Drupal. And then starting from 2007, I basically only use Drupal for everything. Then in 2015, I wrote the web profiler module. That is the one of the main modules that I maintain. So I jump into the contribution. Then the web profiler is 1914. 1915, I attend my first DrupalCon as a speaker.
Oh my God, please say 2014 and 2015 because you're making a lot of people scared. You said 1914 and 19.
Oh, sorry. It's 20. Of course it's 20.
You would be our oldest guest ever if it was 1914, 1915.
Sorry.
So yeah, you and I have been doing Drupal development about the same time. It's about 16, over 16 years.
Yeah,
so that's interesting. Because I don't think our paths have crossed to this point, but they have now. So I asked you on the podcast because you have recently written a book titled Modernizing Drupal 10 Theme Development. Is this your first Drupal book?
Yeah.
So this is quite an accomplishment because I'm a big fan of the book. And I mean, it is quite comprehensive. So what made you decide to do this?
Okay. I want to write a book for a long time, in effect. But it's I never found time and opportunity to do that, basically. Then October of 2022, last year, Pact, the publisher of the book, wrote me on LinkedIn. They are looking for someone to write a book about Drupal theming using modern techniques. And then I see this opportunity, and I start working with them on this project, basically.
I mean, it's jumping into the deep end.
Yeah.
Possibly head first as well. Did you write a lot before, or did you write a lot of blog posts, or like you said that Pact emailed you about it? So how did they find you?
I wrote a lot of blog posts, some of them in English, a lot of them in Italian.
Sure.
Then maybe they found me because I contribute to the community, maybe on LinkedIn. Basically, for that, I suppose.
Well, regardless, they found you, and we're pretty lucky that they did because it's a pretty comprehensive book. We're going to get into that in just a minute. But I want to start. I mean, I really like it when authors take an opinion on the way things should be done and don't try to, be all things to all people, so to speak. And the book is definitely a little bit opinionated in the tooling that you use. I mean, you specifically mentioned, I'm going to go through a list here, and it's probably an incomplete list, but it's a list that I picked out as I was going through things. DDev, Visual Studio Code, Yarn, Paragraphs module, Tailwind, Backstop.js, GitHub, PostCSS, Webpack, StyleLint, ESLint, PHPCS, Storybook. I think it's probably, I'm going to guess, I'm going to go on a probably very short, strong limb here, that these are all tools that you use day to day anyway.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes. I use those tools, some of them in my day-to-day work, some of them for contributing. For example, DDev, the Drupal stack that you can use for spin up Drupal website locally.
Mm-hmm.
I use it a lot for contribution development for Web Profiler and other modules. Then other tools like Storybook or PHPCS, I use them on my daily work job.
Yeah, your daily kind of developer workflow.
Yes, exactly. And some of them I choose them for the book because we want to try to use tools that front-end developers outside of the Drupal community normally uses for front-end development.
Right. I really liked, right off the bat, I really liked the way you took time. I think it's probably almost all of the first chapter and even the second chapter as well, like just setting things up. Setting up that local development environment, talking about like what DDev is, installing things the right way. The book has a companion, like a demo site companion, which, that's no small feat either. And then even once you get into the theming aspect of things, setting up things like Webpack and Browser Sync and Backstop.js, I mean, really kind of comprehensive, just information on how to set up a solid, front-end developer-focused environment. I mean, was that your plan all along? Or I know that when I write lessons for our courses, as an example, like if I want to teach, the one that popped into my mind is like dependency injection. In order to teach dependency injection, you've got to teach like 4 other things before that to introduce that concept. So I might have an outline of, I'm going to teach these 5 things, but in order to get to those 5 things, I end up having to write about 15 things. Did you find yourself kind of falling into those rabbit holes as well as you went?
Yes, this what you say is interesting because I always think that it's important when teaching something to go in the correct order. So you cannot talk about a topic without introducing it with all the information that comes before. And when I wrote the outline for the book, I try to do the same. So I try to avoid talking about a topic using, for example, word, basically, that I never used before.
Right. You have to introduce and make sure that everyone explains that word. Yeah, understands that word.
Exactly. So it's I change the order of the chapters sometimes during the writing of the book to move things around to do the correct order.
Right. I mean, this is very much not there are parts of this book that are like a how-to type of book. But there's also, the other thing that really impressed me was there's a chapter just on explaining how Drupal renders HTML.
Yeah.
And it gets pretty deep, and it's, there's some information in there that you won't see in most blog posts or documentation because it takes a while to explain things as deeply as you need to explain it. So I think for stuff like that, like this book is super valuable for folks.
Thanks. I think that audience for this book is mainly front-end developers that are not in the Drupal community, not in Drupal job, basically. So I want to the first chapters you mentioned about the setup of the local stack is because in my experience, front-end developers maybe have some difficulties with Docker or all these more backend or developer stuff. So I want to explain them how to set up the environment. But the book is also for backend Drupal developers that needs to maybe not doing front-end development, but provide the code and the infrastructure for a front-end developer to do its job.
Yeah, I think that's the category I fall squarely in.
Yeah.
Where I do a little bit of front-end development here and there. I'm very comfortable with back-end development, but there's definitely things in this book that I learned along the way.
Okay, great.
I also think the other audience that you probably had in mind, but you haven't mentioned yet, is folks who are comfortable with Drupal in general and maybe dabble in front-end development, but aren't using all of the tools that you mentioned, or maybe have some holes in their knowledge. The one word that kept coming into my mind as I was reading was, wow, this is like really comprehensive. Like, there are parts of this that I may never use, but it's really interesting that it's in there regardless. And I think for someone who wants to level up their front end development skills from casual to professional, there's not a whole lot that's missing in this book, I don't think.
Yes. Basically, it's an overview for some part, a very in-depth overview about everything about what you can do with front end in Drupal, and also the chapter about how Drupal renders its page. I think maybe a typical front end developer can skip it, but if he understands the internals of the CSM of the CMS, sorry, how Drupal builds renders array, how the cache works, it's mandatory to write maintainable and future-proof code.
Right. So I want to ask, something specifically. You talk about Storybook, and you use, you have some examples involving Storybook in the book. To me, my interaction, with Storybook has mainly been with like large clients, clients who have the budget for separate designers, or focused designers who are doing that stuff in Storybook, and then, possibly different front end developers to implement those designs into Storybook. And I've always kind of grappled with like, what percentage, and you might not have an answer to this, so what percentage of like professional front end developers do you think use Storybook regularly? I've never been able to get a good handle. Is it just a few, or is this something? Is this type of kind of front end component design tool? Is it really common with larger clients, or is it something that's just now starting to gain traction, or like where do you see that falling?
Yeah, basically, Storybook, it's a tool that is used a lot in front-end community that does React or front-end that use front-end frameworks. It starts to be used on project outside front-end frameworks like Drupal, for example. Maybe at the beginning of this year, or at least when Drupal 10.1 has been released, because starting from that version, we have the single directory components module in core, so we can simply build a front end theme using components, and we can use Storybook to develop those components before the building phase of the website, basically.
Right.
So, of course, I see the benefit of using Storybook in larger projects, of course, but also in larger teams, because if you have the same developers that provides all the building and teaming and so on, probably you don't need Storybook at all. But if you have a team that designs the components, and then some people in the team that do the Drupal building and backend development, that usually comes later in the cycle, but you need to start developing the components from the design system and so on. We notice I'm working on a big project this month that is using Storybook and all those stuff. And we see that right now we can build and define a single directory components for a paragraph or a block, for example, before building that paragraph of that block. So we can build the CSS, the markup, the JavaScript, show the component to the final client, the final customer. without the Drupal part, and this is useful.
Are there other, and I don't want to go too far down into the storybook rabbit hole, are there other tools that you see having a lot of traction similar to Storybook with Drupal front-end developers? Or is Storybook pretty much the way to go right now?
Yes, probably it's the tool that has been chosen probably by the Drupal community right now, because there is an integration between Storybook and the SDC, single directory component module, so you can easily expose your components in a Storybook instance.
Yeah, let's talk about SDC, single directory components, for a moment. You dedicated an entire chapter to it. I mean, I think you probably agree that the future is very bright for single directory components. Is the skills necessary to create a single directory component, are those skills very different than traditional front-end theming in Drupal or front-end development in Drupal, or is it just kind of applying those skills in a different way?
Yes, because it's just reorganizing files in a different way, basically. So in the single directory components module allows you to create a separate folder called components in your theme or your module. And in that folder, you have a single folder for every component. And in that folder, you have a metadata file that describes the component, the twig file for the markup, and some CSS and JavaScript files unique for that component. So it's the same code you wrote in the theme folder, probably of Drupal, but or better organized. And then you have to write all the mapping. So in the templates folder of your theme, you still have to override all the templates of Drupal, and in that file you include or embed the twig file from the. So there is it's one step more to use single directory components, because you have to write probably two different twig files, one for the component and one for the mapping.
Are you using single directory components in your day-to-day work at this point?
Yes, we are working on a big project for a university here in Italy, and all the components has been developed using single directory components exposed on Storybook, so the customer sees them on Storybook, and then they can use those components to define pages, and then we can map the Drupal structures, so the paragraphs and so on, to that components. And we are using it a lot. We are contributing to both the module, because it's in very early stage at the moment, so there are some issues with it. So we contribute some patches to the SDC module, also to the add-on that Lullabot wrote for the Storybook integration.
Right. Yes, I've seen that stuff. All right, cool. I a bunch of other chapters in the book. It was really interesting to me, because I know that when I'm building a theme, I always start with the header and then the footer. Well, I start with like basic typography and all that stuff first, but then header, footer, and then node pages. And it was really interesting, because as I was going through your book, your chapters are kind of laid out that way as well. You've got a chapter on styling the header and the footer, on styling content, on styling forms, on styling blocks. Is that the way you approach when you're building doing the front end for a site? Do you kind of the same way that you laid it out in the book?
Yes, exactly. We follow that path, and I try to add some more topics and knowledge at every steps. So I start with the header and footer, because probably in the header and footer you only have blocks or something like that. So it's more easier than styling an entity, for example, a standard content entity. And then I move to the content, where you have probably a node or something like that, when you maybe have fields. So you have to understand how to extract fields information from Drupal, how to pass them to Twig, and so on.
Cool. I did want to mention, one more chapter that I was really surprised, and honestly, I just skimmed it. So this is one of the few chapters I haven't read yet, on using Google Lighthouse for front end performance. So again, this is one of those skills that I know in my experience, not all front developer, not even all professional front end developers or full-time front end developers have, but those that do use Lighthouse are very, very, like they want to talk about it. They want to mention like their Lighthouse scores are high and stuff like that. So again, I'm going to assume, is this something that you use in your day-to-day work?
Yes.
Right. And for those who are unaware of what Lighthouse is, can you just explain what Google Lighthouse is real quick?
Yes. Basically, it's a tool that measure some metrics from every pages of a website, and it extracts metrics like layout shift, or time to the page to be interactive, or some other metrics like time to first byte. A lot of metrics that that are calculated in the browser. For this, Google Lighthouse works well when you're using Google Chrome, because they're using some APIs that are only available on Google Chrome browser. And you can use those values. They call them core web vitals. You can use those metrics to check if some part of the page can be improved for performance and accessibility point of view. And the interesting part is that Google Lighthouse can provide you suggestions about how to improve your pages. And some of those suggestions are from for Drupal. So there is a repository of suggestion, basically. You can contribute to it. It's open source. And you can add, for example, if images are not lazy loaded, or if some JavaScript blocks CSS rendering or something like that. Then there are maybe standard approaches in Drupal. For example, you can enable the lazy loading of images, or installing a module to improve something. So you can provide those suggestions to developers, specific for Drupal.
So that's really interesting. So that I think what you're saying is that in the Lighthouse report in Google Chrome, it can sense whether or not it's a Drupal site, and if it is, it will give you Drupal specific suggestions.
Exactly.
Right. Wow, that's really, I didn't know that was a feature of Google Lighthouse. So that's pretty interesting. All right, you mentioned Web Profiler module. You do talk about Web Profiler in the book a bit as well. So real quick, for folks who aren't familiar with Web Profiler, why don't you give us a lowdown on what that module does?
Okay, basically Web Profiler is a porting, more or less, of the web debug toolbar from Symfony. If you ever use Symfony, when you are on development, at the bottom of every HTML pages, you can see a toolbar with some metrics that the tool calculate on the page you are viewing. I move some of the code from some of the code are already in Drupal because we are using Symfony, some Symfony components. I wrote all the missing stuff that are in Symfony but not in Drupal. So if you install the Web Profiler module, if you have a permission to do that, you see a toolbar on the bottom of every web page with a lot of widgets that collects some metrics about the page that you are rendering, you are viewing.
So, but it's more, it's not metrics about the front end performance as much as it is about caching, I believe, right?
It's both, because if you are using Web Profiler on Google Chrome, you also see Core Web Vitals calculated the same way as Lighthouse. And you also see how many AJAX call the browser is performing.
Oh, wow.
But the most part of the data is collected on the backend, of course. So you have many queries, which query has executed, cache hits, for example, how many blocks or views or forms are rendered on a page, the route information, so parameters from routing, the controller that is matched.
Yeah, that's the stuff I'm familiar with seeing in Web Profiler. I didn't realize it was integrated with the Google Lighthouse, the core Web Vitals stuff as well.
Yes, I've added it at the end of last year, and I also improved Web Profiler, adding some other metrics, especially for the book, because, for example, until this Spring web profiler does not collect anything about single directory components, for example. Now there is a data collector for which components are used on a page.
Oh, wow.
And so on. So I expanded the tool because I needed that data in the book to explain
sure.
how things work.
All right. Well, I think that over the past 28 minutes or so, we've conveyed just how comprehensive this book is. So let me ask you one more question. So for someone who is a casual front-end developer, a casual Drupal front-end developer,
okay,
familiar with writing Sass, maybe familiar with overriding template files, maybe not much more than that. If you had to mentor that type of developer, what would be the 2 concepts that you think that they should learn next? Is it using Google Lighthouse? Is it learning SDC? Is it something else? Like, what, in your opinion, is it using all of these tools that you mentioned, like Webpack and Post CSS, and really understanding those tools? Like, what would you tell an aspiring front-end developer who kind of wanted to make the leap from casual to professional? What advice would you give them?
Okay, first of all, understanding why Drupal does things as it does. It's mandatory to become more professional. So understanding how renders array, caching, the render pipeline works. I think this is the first point where to start. Then SDC probably will be one of the first way to develop a theme in the future. And if I can, one more.
Oh, well, I only said 2. I'm sorry.
The last chapter of the book is about decoupling. So building a front end without Twig and Drupal theme layer. So the book provides 2 examples. One using vanilla JavaScript, so performing fetch requests to the backend. And one using the Next for Drupal, so the integration between Drupal and Next.js. It will be probably one of the most used technology to build the decoupled Drupal website. So, and it's interesting because you can build the website with React, so completely decoupling from Drupal, and you can maybe use also in that scenario you can use a Storybook, because Storybook is well suited for developing React components. So you can reuse maybe you cannot reuse the same SDC components written in Twig on React, of course, but maybe
similar concepts.
Similar concept, exactly.
So do you ever envision yourself developing a Drupal site that isn't using either SDC or a decoupled front end? Or are you past the point where you would build a site not using one of those tools?
No, probably we will use that 2 tools in all next website we will develop.
So I would argue then that, based on that answer, the probably the most important thing for aspiring front-end developers to get comfortable with is components.
Yeah.
And possibly Storybook as well.
Yes, I agree.
Because if you're going to build a modern site, you're probably going to use components, whether it's fully decoupled or whether it's SDC, and those components have to be designed somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, Luca, this was fantastic. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today. And I, really appreciate the work you did in the book. Again, it is Modernizing Drupal 10 Theme Development, published by Pact. I'll have links to the book and a lot of other things we talked about in the show notes of the podcast. So great to meet you, and I'm sure we'll run into each other at some point in the future.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and go buy the book, because it can be a very useful set of information for a Drupal themer.
Thanks for listening to the DrupalEasy podcast. Don't forget to check out all of our long-form Drupal training courses at DrupalEasy.com, and stay tuned for the next episode of the DrupalEasy podcast. See ya!